Continuing on with the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab Outstanding Guest Speaker Series, today we are pleased to present Al Wilson. Al is a dedicated volunteer and currently serves as the chairperson of the Historical Committee for the Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery Association. Today, he will share the fascinating story of Mount Moriah Cemetery from its founding in 1855 through its abandonment in 2011 to the inspiring grassroots efforts to reclaim and revitalize the grounds. The cemetery is now being transformed into a destination for education, horticulture, and wildlife observation. Al will also provide guidance on how to research and uncover information about ancestors or individuals of interest who may be interred at the cemetery. So I'd like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Al.
Thank you, Suzanne. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about a topic that I enjoy very much. I've taken my presentation and I've put it into sections. The cemetery of Mount Moriah was founded in 1855. It was the confluence of two phenomenon that occurred at the same time. One was the rural cemetery movement. This concept that was taking hold at the time was a reevaluation of how people handled grief, handled death, and um, visited their loved ones that had passed away. So before this, you pretty much had churchyard graves. And the other part that was occurring at the time was industrialization. And the churches started looking at their graveyards and realized that they were really expensive to upkeep. And land was at a premium in the middle of the cities that was uh, being developed. So they saw this movement where large tracts of land were going to be put aside by a separate company and decided to sell their graveyards land and move their interred to a rural cemetery and bought plots for doing that. And then gradually people just bought their own plots. It was a wholesale change in a business model of burials. The cemetery ran from 1855 to 2011. Our perception is, and our experience was that it was going downhill for a long period of time. And our volunteers that are still involved remember a day in April 2011 where they all passed word amongst themselves that the cemetery had locked the gates and put a message on their answering machine that they were closed for business forever. What they found was when they arrived that the cemetery had accepted a burial that day in the morning, closed at noon, and hadn't covered the grave. So already the Friends of Mount Moriah were engaged because they took a pickup truck, got there, and filled in the grave. There was about 3 years of legal wrangling. Um, and in Philadelphia, they have something that's called the Orphans Court that deals with these types of issues. Normally, what happens is if you are a owner of a building in the city, the Orphans Court will appoint a receiver and say, sell off the assets, sell off the business, and then the case gets dismissed. What happened here was the Mount Moriah Cemetery Preservation Court was formed. It consists of the nonprofit group that I'm a volunteer with, the Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery, members from the city of Philadelphia, and Yeadon Borough. Those three groups form a committee. Every 6 months, they're required to go before the Orphans Court and report progress on what is occurring in the cemetery. As of 2022, we approximately estimate about 70% of the cemetery has quote unquote been reclaimed, meaning free enough from vegetation that it's easy to navigate. We figured out there's about 180,000 individuals interred, including at least 26 Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, and two of those received the Congressional Medal of Honor twice. And we have one pair of brothers who are buried together that were awarded the Medal of Honor. So our philosophy is that if you are remembering people and saying their name, they're not truly forgotten. And we've collected a couple quotes that kind of reflect the volunteers' philosophy. It's also reflected in our activities. Every December, we have the Wreaths Across America ceremony, where we attempt to have enough wreaths for all 2,400 of our national cemetery interred. We ask the volunteers as they're placing the wreath to say the person's name so that they're not forgotten. Mount Moriah is one of two cemeteries in the country where a national cemetery is contained within the boundaries of a private cemetery. This is a map of the cemeteries that were in the physical city boundaries. Um, and you can see down in the middle how many little populations of cemeteries there were that, for the most part, have been moved to the outer edges, or in our case, um, to the complete edge. We actually occupy the boundary between Philadelphia and Yaden. One section is in Philadelphia, the others in Yaden. It was one contiguous piece of property separated by Cobb's Creek, and somewhere along the line, probably in the 1910s, someone decided to create a parkway or road that mirrored the Cobb's Creek. So there's actually a very busy road that now intersects the single cemetery. This is a close-up of the cemeteries that have been in the city historically. Betsy Ross. This is the flagpole where Betsy Ross had been buried from about 1855 to about 1975. So Betsy Ross is a great example of this phenomenon. She was buried at the Arch Street Cemetery in 1835. She was removed from the cemetery along with her second husband, buried here. At the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a stone. That's her grandkids that are buried there. At about 1960s, that we know that the cemetery started uh, becoming in disrepair. There's a number of letters in our archives where the city was bemoaning the fact that the area around Betsy Ross was not being well taken care of. And the cemetery would write back, well, why don't you give us some money and we'll upkeep it. So that went on for about 15 years. 1975 arrived, and the city was like, well, look, the bicentennial is happening. Let's evacuate Betsy Ross and bring her back into the city. And so they hired an archaeologist from the University of Pennsylvania. He came, he dug where the records indicated that Betsy was buried and didn't find anything. So he dug a little bit to the right, didn't find anything. He dug a little bit to the left, found something, declared that was Betsy, and filled in the hole. This is a picture of the Daughters of the Revolution who originally put that flagpole in place on the spot that she had been buried. And this is the plaque dedication that occurred in 2022. One of the aspects of the rural cemetery is gatehouses. This was the gatehouse as of we about 1910. So the idea of the gatehouse was a grand entrance to the cemetery that you were walking through and you were going to honor your ancestors. This is very close to a trolley stop. So frequently, um, caskets were taken on special trolleys and moved out here, where they were picked up at the edge. It's literally at the edge of the property, and then you'd be wagoned into the cemetery. This gatehouse was designed by an architect by Stephen Decatur. Um, what you can see here is the representation that was on the deeds. I want to point out in the center there's a statue on top. That will be important to remember later on. This is another gatehouse that was designed by Stephen Decatur. This is in Gettysburg right after the battle. This is what it looks like today. This is what the Mount Moriah gatehouse looks like today. This is from the side. Now, what I want to point out to you is, see all those graves? When the cemetery opened up a new entrance with a business office, and this is with a telephoto lens, and I'm standing about at that spot. You'll see a picture later on where it is. The cemetery, I would assume, started looking around and saying, "Look at all that land. Let's start burying people there because we're not going to use the gatehouse." This occurred probably in the late 1960s. We think there was a fire at the gatehouse sometime in the 1950s. We have pictures of people living there in the 1950s, so it's a little hard to understand when the fire actually occurred. There's that statue. That statue was moved from the top of the gatehouse onto the grave of one of the lead land gardeners, Henry Jones. We don't know how, we don't know why. He certainly didn't purchase it, but he was the lead for a number of years, and I guess everybody thought he deserved it. I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth. This is what it looks like close up. I like this statue. It it is very representative of the time of the rural cemetery. I'm going to digress a little bit. So this is a great example of this is Monument Cemetery. This is a great example of the rural cemetery movement, or how cemeteries were treated. So this cemetery located in North Philadelphia, Temple University decided they want the land. They contacted what owners they could and said, "Hey, we're going to move you to another cemetery. Pay up, or we're not going to move your stone. We'll move the body, but we're not going to move the stone." And so the stones ended up at the foot of the Betsy Ross Bridge as a breakwater because people didn't pay to have their family. Now, a lot of these were probably 100, 150 years old, and there was really no family to pay for moving it. Here's another example. This is a picture of the gatehouse when people were living in it. I got this picture off a woman who was a child at the time, in 1954 and living at the gatehouse. One of the attributes of a rural cemetery that it was landscaped. So here's the property. This is in about 1850, before it became a cemetery. And you can see it's divided into lots. And the original corporation saw an economic opportunity and bought all these plots to make one big cemetery. So this is another map of the time. This shows where it is in the city. As I mentioned before, it's right on the edge. And then this is an overlay of that of the two maps. You can see it exactly conforms to the pre-1855 map. What I'm pointing out here is all the arrows are people who are either buried in the cemetery or were original people in the company. Horatio P. Connell, he's buried in the cemetery. Up at the top is another one of his properties. And then on the left-hand side is Palmer. We were just discussing him this morning. He actually had a cemetery that was just adjacent, and he merged it with Mount Moriah. This is what the cemetery, what we call the Alpha section. So this is standing across from the gatehouse. So up until about 1910, this was just a farm that the cemetery owned. And as I said, they were running out of space in what we call the numeric sections or the original rural sections, and decided that they were going to start interments in this section, but they weren't going to space them out. They were only going to, instead of doing whole plots, some of our plots are maybe 60 feet by 60 feet. They were only going to sell plots that were at most 3 graves wide. So this is a picture comparison standing in approximately the same spot. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see where the new office is, which is up against Kinsasing Avenue. Here's a map of the actual cemetery. So here at the bottom is the Philadelphia. There's Cobbs Creek Parkway with Cobbs Creek. And then this is the Yaden side. So you can see here how large the actual cemetery is and how much vegetation up against the Cobbs Creek there is. And over here on these sections, we've tried to approximate where each section is. So this is a 1910 brochure picture. This is called the Soldier's Rest. There's 400 gravestones of individuals or men who died at either in transit or at the Satterley Hospital, which was in West Philadelphia. Satterley Hospital was the largest hospital for Civil War veterans. Most of these soldiers died in the early battles like Bull Run. This is what it looks like today. This is one of the two parts of the National Cemetery System. This is maintained by the Veterans Administration, and very well, I might add. This is a view that a picture I took on Memorial Day, I think 2022. This is from the neighboring hill that fall. This is a picture of what is the section that's over in the Yaden side. This is the Naval Asylum or Naval Home, if you want to refer to it. The Philadelphia Naval Yard had two facilities. They had a naval hospital and they had a retirement home called the Naval Asylum. If you passed away at the hospital, or if you had no family and you were elderly, you could sign over your pension to the Navy. They agreed to put you in the convalescent home and bury you. There's about 2,400 graves in 5 sections in this area of the cemetery. This is a section that we call Monument Hill. This is the area where apparently the rich tried to outcompete each other for the largest uh, vaults. My historical committee has done research on each of these individuals, and we haven't found anything significant about them whatsoever. All they appear to have is a lot of money. Thomas Hoyt, I always found interesting because what we uncovered about him was he was a Maine businessman. He divorced his wife, married her aunt, and then moved to Philadelphia. Um, we we like to think that his kids just followed the money because there's a couple of kids buried with him, and that he just left Maine to escape the controversy of marrying his wife's aunt. This is a shot from my I took. We do invite photography clubs to come. We do have a yearly calendar, and this is one my entry for the first year's calendar. This is the tomb of John McCullough. He was a well-known Shakespearean actor of the day. This is what it looks like now in a picture of him. I put this in here because um, these people obviously cared about their little baby who passed away. This is one of the more heart-rendering, ornamental graves in the cemetery. I want to point out this is again the 1910 advertisements, the Baker family vault. What I want you to pay attention to here is the top part. Top part served two reasons. One was it allowed the gases from decomposing bodies to um, leave, not create a dangerous situation. But around this time, America had a very morbid fascination with death. This was about the time that chlorophyll was becoming more prevalent in surgeries. This is about the time where the story Frankenstein became more prevalent with in publication, and so people were very worried about being buried alive. So this is an artist representation that I created, where it was a selling point to have one of these because they would put a bell. So if you were buried alive, you could get out of your coffin and start ringing the bell, and somebody would let you out. Now, there is no record of this ever occurring, but it was a great fear. So much so that this is a patent for actual casket where they promised to bury you with the rope for the bell in your hand in case you woke up and you needed to get out. So let's see if we can do the poll.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, can everyone see the results? Al, can you see the results?
I can see them.
Okay, did you want to go over them and I'll end the poll?
So what it currently says is that 0 people said that's creepy. Choice two, 1 person out of 23 or 4% said creepy, but each to their own. 17% said doesn't matter to me, but a whopping 78% says, well, that sounds like a great way to remember people and remind future generations of people past. And so, oh, okay, we can actually share the results. So I like asking people their opinion because I'm very keen on it. But at this time, I'll proceed. Stop sharing. This was a thing. There was a time where people were encouraged to go spend the day and talk about their loved ones. Our Facebook group is full of people who finally remember doing this. Here's Linda, who I know pretty well. Les, who's a frequent contributor to our Facebook page. Um, these people didn't have a picture of their picnicking, but they still visit the cemetery. This is a current set of Ukrainians. They show up every either Palm Sunday or Easter Sunday uh, and set out a full spread, alcohol, and this year that we took this picture, they brought a priest with them. And they stay there for a couple hours and talk about the people that they knew that are buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery. I think it's wonderful. We tend to um, try to continue that tradition. This is a local Philadelphia businessman, founder of Bassett's Ice Cream. And we knew where he was buried. His stone was face down into the ground. And we called the ice cream company and said, hey, we'd like to write the stone. We are wondering if you'd like to come out and we'd have a ceremony. And they said, yeah, we'd love to do that. We'll bring an ice cream truck. So during the pandemic, we had a little ice cream social at the gravesite. You can't see it from here. It's on the other side of that tree. But people came. We talked about their ancestors. We talked about their family history. And these are four descendants they're the fifth and sixth generation of Bassett's to be running the company. Every October, we have a um, craft show in the cemetery. Um, and it's probably our most popular event. We probably have about 2,000 people go there. We just accept donations. It's a privately run event. There's a lot of cosplay. There's a lot of beautiful uh, crafts, and we do tours and discuss with people the history of the cemetery. I'll mention that it's these types of events that gather interest in the cemetery, gather money for the cemetery. There is no anticipation that there'll ever be a cemetery again. We estimate that once we get the entire cemetery cleared, it'll cost about $500,000 a year to keep it clear. And so, based upon that, where do we get that money? And our current business model is donations, of course, but why would someone just donate to a place that they don't have anyone buried? So we have a walking tour physical, we have a walking tour that's virtual. You can just listen to the app. We have events like this. Um, it's a wonderful place where we've been declared an arboretum, so it's a wonderful place to enjoy nature and go birding. It's a destination spot. I mentioned this because this is a phenomenon all over. This is not Mount Moriah, but here's a person that spent the seventh game of the World Series with the Chicago Cubs, listened to it on the radio, and spending time with his dad. So here's some references to the rural cemetery movement that I wanted to mention. These are excellent references. So for genealogy research, Ancestry has a copy of the numeric sections from about 1855 to 1977. Their pathway to Ancestry is not well understood by us. We're not sure how they got their hands on it. When the cemetery was abandoned in 2011, the Friends of Mount Moriah called the city and said, the office is not secured. There's a lot of records in here. Can you help? And I'll give the city a lot of credit. They've been a great partner. They swooped in, boxed everything, and moved it to their archives. So it's a private collection within their archives. There's about 300 boxes, and that's one of our resources. So you can go to Ancestry, and if that ancestor was buried from 1855 to 1977 in a numeric section, you probably can find them. We've, over the last 12 years, have gone to the archives, scanned the records ourselves, including the alpha section. The alpha sections, if you remember, I was talking before, is down here on the lower left-hand side. And I mentioned that this little tiny area probably has the same amount of burials as the rest of the cemetery, or at least half. And so if they were buried from 1910 on, they're more likely to be in the alpha section, although there are burials still occurring in the numeric sections. There are some gaps in the record. I don't think you can have records from 1855 to 2011 and not have lost some of them somewhere along the way. For our resources, of course, we use Ancestry. We have a tree on there because we're very dedicated to people finding their relatives and knowing where they're buried. Family search is very important to us because it's good and it's free. We keep all of our findings up on Find a Grave, whether it be to create a new memorial or to update the memorial with the plot. Several of my volunteer colleagues are very keen on linking all the people in the cemetery together. So we have, I think we currently have maybe 1,500 edits at any given time going on. I don't want anybody to not include Google Books and Google Patents in their searches. Google Books does not readily come up when you do a Google search. You're and nor does Google Patents. If you go to those collections themselves, they're a lot easier to find records. We find a lot of references to the people that were interred in the cemetery in Google Books, in Google Patents, and of course the Library of Congress. And there's a local resource, phillyhistory.org, that has photographs of a lot of the streets that the people lived on. Philadelphia had a very interesting program. Apparently, as the story goes, Philadelphians are very litigious. And so the city was in the habit of any public works that occurred, they would go photograph it before and after to show that there was no defects when it completed, such that someone would sue and say they were injured because of it. What we also do is we have a composition. These are each an individual post on the Facebook group, where if we found a photograph or an interesting stone, we publish it to the rest of the group. This serves two purposes. It gives the um, Facebook group an attachment to the cemetery. It gives a little bit of history, but also for the volunteers, it serves as a reminder that these are not just stones. These are real life people. So for each of these, we tend to give a little bio. I want to thank you here. I don't believe, well, yeah. That was I talked very fast. Are there any questions?
Okay, yeah, there's one in the chat box that was towards the beginning of the presentation that wanted to know what was the location of the other national cemetery that was put into a private cemetery?
Uh, I believe it's in California. That's what I was told.
Oh,
There's another one in California. I'm not sure which one it was. I was just told that there was two.
okay. And I'll open it up to the class. I have a list of questions myself, but I'll let the class go first. Go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask the question, then please mute your microphone again. Okay, well, while I'm waiting for questions to come in, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about how a lot of the cemeteries that were within the city were moved to the outskirts of the city. About what years did that happen, and did all of them get moved?
So the answer to that question, no, not all of them moved. It was up to the individual. So if you go to Christ Church, which is where George Washington worshiped while he was in Philadelphia, that cemetery still exists. It really depended upon the economics of the time, whether the cemetery was economically viable enough to maintain. So, no, I don't have a good number of how many went and how many didn't go, but it's a considerable number. We have at least 20 in um, the cemetery, and they have various mm, mode of so the Scots Presbyterian, um, they apparently did not offer people to move their stones. So they have a single monument, 1,400 people mass buried, and decided that was it. We have, I think may I share some more slides if you don't mind?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I'd like you to show the slide to the class that you showed me yesterday about how the monuments, the stone monuments were used for breakwater.
Okay, let me, let me go this.
And while you're doing that, there were some comments in the chat box about how, as people grew up, they did visit cemeteries for picnics and family
Oh,
gatherings.
really?
Uh-huh.
So one of the examples is the First Baptist Church of Philadelphia. So in the 1860s, the First Baptist Church decided that they wanted to move their cemetery to Mount Moriah. They got a permit because obviously you have to get permission to dig up bodies. And in the middle of winter, tried to move the cemetery. In 2017, they were building a condo, and as they were digging for the parking garage, they started uncovering human remains. And so there was an anonymous tip that went into the city and said, "Hey, that construction site, they're taking human remains and they're putting them in dumpsters and hauling them away." So the police came out and the police were like, "These people have been dead for 150 years. We don't have any jurisdiction." The medical examiner came out and said, "They've been dead for 150 years. We have no jurisdiction." So again, the orphans court got involved and told the construction company that they had to allow 2 weeks for archaeologists to um, dig out the remains. Those remains went to Rutgers University, and a whole team of researchers looked into different aspects. They looked into dental areas, biomes, genetics. This is the original photograph of the site. What they did was they did the same offer where they asked people if they wanted the individual bodies to be moved with their stones, and they would put them in an individual plot. But if people didn't, they would put them in the center and put one monument for them all. What I find fascinating about this is they took the stones, and instead of dumping them in the river, they made a walkway. And then last fall, we had a reburial and there was the original 1860 move missed at least 500 people. And that was just one part of if you look at a map, that it was shaped like an L, and they haven't even gotten to the other portion yet. There's a building on top of it. So there's probably still more bodies there. This is a view from the side. You can see the monument and then the walkway.
Dave Perdue here in Reno. A couple of comments. There's a hillside cemetery up above the UNR, and there's a GAR cemetery within Hillside, and that hillside cemetery had the similar experience to what yours did with the university looking for land. And what happened here, though, is the individual plots were registered, were deeded and registered. And so when the university decided they wanted the land, they found that they were going to have to battle many families because it was deeded property. And so that stopped and the cemetery was saved. So that was a good thing. So yeah, there's a lots of land grab out there in cemeteries. And another thing, I've been messing with Family Search Lab, which is a detailed search of records which they haven't indexed. And I searched on Mount Moriah in Pennsylvania, Mount Moriah Cemetery in Pennsylvania, and I got 5,500 hits. I don't know if you've seen those or been there of deeds. So
No,
just
that'd be great. Yeah, pass that along. Send it through Suzanne, or um, I will show my email address
yeah,
again.
yeah. And so that may be some help to you. I see
Yeah.
some names here, but I don't know that they're all deed holders or buried there, but there are 5,500 appearances in their detailed search. They have a in-depth search now, which they didn't have until a few years, well, I guess a few months ago. They search basically records they've scanned but never indexed. So it might help you.
Yeah, just to add something to that, Al, to what Dave just said, you can go to Family Search, just Google Family Search Labs,
Okay.
LABS, and their lab website will come up and you'll have several options. And the one Dave is referring to is called full text. So if you just go choose that full text search, as the option in the labs, you'll find exactly what Dave is talking about.
Great. Thanks.
Marilyn and Georgia, did you want to comment? I see you have a comment there in the chat box. Give her a second to see if she's going to unmute her microphone.
Sorry, I had to unmute my mic. No, I was just saying we had run into a problem in Ohio with some graves of relatives and found that even if they are not maintained, they are protected by law in Ohio.
Yeah. So what's interesting about Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania has a law that says the local municipality is responsible for the integrity and financial stewardship of cemeteries in their jurisdiction, and it specifically exempts Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So if you have a cemetery somewhere in Pennsylvania, that municipality is supposed to keep an eye on the cemetery to make sure that it is uh, being taken care of. But the major cities are not required to do that. What I have on the screen right now is a sampling of the books that have some sort of tie-in to Mount Moriah. The Gettysburg Surgeons hasn't been released yet. We collaborated with the author, Barbara Franco, and located graves for her and confirmed that they were of Civil War surgeons. Ungentle Goodnights is the story of the Naval Asylum and Naval Hospital. The little post on the hospital only has one mention about a physician that was in Indian country. I'm very enamored with the On the Roof Gang. It's a 2-book series before World War II and during World War II. It's the story of a naval cryptographer. And as I was telling Suzanne before, he was a Missouri farm boy, didn't want to farm, got disowned by his family, and um, joined the Army. The Army put him in Alaska. He was miserable for 4 years, ran into a Navy recruiter, and the recruiter said, well, if you re-up, I'll make sure you go somewhere warm. So they stationed him in Guam. And while in Guam, as an amateur ham radio operator, he heard the Japanese military broadcasting their messages on ham radio and became interested. He became very good at recording the dots and dashes of their unique code. Got so good that the United States Navy pulled him back to teach a class in Washington at the Naval Department. Now, the Naval Department consisted of a building that's the National Mall today. That's how big it was. But they didn't have any space. America knew that they were going to war. So they put a shack on top of the building, and that's how they got their nickname, On the Roof Gang. It was perfect for them because number one, it could get radio signals the best, but also it was up out of the way and nobody knew what they were doing up there.
What was
So
his
here,
name? I'm sorry. What's his
I'm
name?
sorry. So his name is Harry Kidder. He's on Find a Grave. There's a picture of him if we wanted to bring him up. But
Uh,
the On the Roof Gang is a novelization of the story by a former Navy cryptographer. I wanted to show this slide. This is the green, and then for whatever reason we changed colors a couple years ago. Um, so this is uh, the progress we've made in reclaiming the cemetery from vegetation.
So the bottom slides, the bottom pictures that are in kind of like the aqua color, those are the
Yes.
ones that have been most recently updated.
Yeah, so this goes from this is ends at 2023, so it goes back 8 years. So up they didn't label the years, but the top right is 2019. So the bottom row is 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. They didn't publish one for 2024. I just noticed that when I made the slide.
And the yellow areas are the ones that are yet to be reclaimed.
No, the yellow areas are things that are only cut once a year. The white is the unclaimed areas.
Oh, I see.
It's gray in the first three slides. I mean, first three panels at the top.
Well, that's all volunteerism.
That's all volunteerism,
That is
all of it.
amazing.
Yeah, this is 200 acres. It's a big spot.
Wow.
This is the before and after. This is at the top of the hill behind the gatehouse. You can see the alpha sections behind it. Um, up up on the right-hand side, you can see Center City, Philadelphia. This is the progression on this grave. This is the Circle of St. John. This is a very large area in the cemetery that was purchased by the Masons, who then um, subdivided it and sold it to individuals.
I can't imagine the amount of work that went into this. Amazing.
This is that Father Time. The picture on the left is mine. The picture on the right is about 2011 when the cemetery was abandoned. This is a picture from Cobbs Creek Parkway looking into the Yaden side of the cemetery.
Do you mind sharing your Facebook page with us?
Yes, I think I had right there.
Okay, great.
So the Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery Organization, there we have what's notable individuals. One of my committee members is a former journalist. He took about the 60 that we had, rewrote them, and then has expanded it out. We now have about 450 individuals with individual bios. Um, we are currently publishing on Blue Sky, which is the competitor to Twitter. That is me. And we specialize in history and people. The Instagram um, is um, is roughly the equivalent of the official Facebook page. The official page is announcements, but we have a group. There's about 7,000 people in the group, and that's more of a discussion area. That's where people, if they don't go to the websites, will ask about status of where their loved ones are. There's updates on progress. We talk about fundraisers. It's just a more community situation.
Now, a lot of the people in my class, especially during the summer months, travel, a lot through the U.S., and a lot of them do genealogy road trips. I assume that during the summer months, you have tours through the cemetery.
We do. We also have a self-guiding tour. We have an application that probably be good to list also. We've the app shows a map with GPS, and as you walk close to one of our points of interest, it'll just start talking to you and explain what you're looking at.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a great app.
It is, and it's free. It's free to us, it's free to them. With a lot of things that are free, you get what you pay for in that there is no support. So it takes a little while to get used to. But it's with only with only about 15 volunteers in the area, most of them are involved in physical activities, lawn mowing, clearing, cutting. Um, Literally, I'm the only person that does physical tours. There is a group called Hidden Philadelphia that will occasionally do a tour, maybe once a year. Um, but what we tend to do is if somebody wants to come, we can make a personal appointment. I've done that several times where either in general or during our events. So during the ice cream social, we had one in association with the Mutter Museum. That was a good collaboration. They gave us about 650 death certificates of people who died in the cemetery. We located them, saw if they had a stone or not, and then they created a walking tour of people who died during the 1918 pandemic and talked about their personal stories and what it represented. We did a study that showed the because they we did a study that showed that during the pandemic of 1918, the average time to bury somebody was 1 to 2 days, and the cemeteries around Mount Moriah were anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks to bury someone. That's how efficient Mount Moriah was at the time.
George, I see that you have a couple comments in the chat box. Did you wish to share them with our guest speaker?
Sure. Yeah, I just said that I, recently I had contacted a DNA match, actually somebody that managed it for him on, and this woman, it turned out she lives in South Carolina. My DNA match lives in North Carolina, and we were messaging on Ancestry, and she sent me this like, it looked like she copied and pasted this invitation to a cemetery cleaning day, which was being held at a cemetery in Georgia. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Well, I ended up talking to the man on the phone afterwards because she'd given me his phone number. I may have mentioned this to you before. It was kind of awkward because somebody, managing a ancestry account, I was kind of figuring they'd, I was trying to figure out how we're related, and she said, "Oh, he's waiting for your phone call." And turns out that this man he's very interested in genealogy and history, but doesn't he doesn't do well with email and that sort of thing and messaging. He's a telephone person and likes to talk. So it turns out that this old cemetery in Georgia is located right next to where there was an old primitive Baptist church. And the primitive Baptists they have a little different than regular Baptists. I think they don't believe in music and a bunch of other things. But anyway, apparently this church was long gone, and but the old cemetery with like literally hundreds of graves is still there, and people, descendants are kind of interested in taking because there's no, perpetual care or anything. So they formed some sort of a, loose group of people that come once a year. And apparently there's another cemetery that's not too far also in Georgia where they do the same thing. Once a year, they have like a group of people that, they contact, and then they will come from, in this case, this woman from South Carolina and the man from North Carolina. Descendants will come on this. I'm sure they'll spend the night in a motel or whatever and spend the weekend or whatever, but I think it's on a Saturday, and they come and they actually clean the cemetery. I guess somebody brings a mower and they try to clean the graves and that keep it in good shape just once a year though. And then what they do is kind of socialize after the work's done. They have set up a tent, and then people will bring, food, baked goods or whatever they've cooked to share. And apparently, I mean, people are really into this. And she thought I might be interested in coming. And I said, well, I don't think so. I live in California, but thanks for the invitation. But like she said, they actually have two cemeteries that she knows of down in Georgia that do that are, long abandoned, and then they were next to churches that no longer exist.
Yeah, so we have a number of programs. Section 2 was cleared by the Boy Scouts. We have a donation program. So the first weekend of every month, $250 sponsors clearing a section out. We're in the mode right at the moment where money and volunteers are very tight.
Right.
And so we're not clearing any new sections at this point.
Yeah.
We're just trying to maintain what we have.
Yeah.
There
I think
is
it works better with a smaller cemetery that has 300 graves than
Yeah.
than
Well, I mean,
something
think
the size
everything's
of Mount
relative.
Moriah
Uh,
with 200 acres. My
I'm
goodness.
a big, yeah, I'm a big believer of, you eat an elephant once,
Yeah.
one bite at a time. So
Yeah.
yes,
It's
we do have a
commitment.
unique problem at 200 acres, but
Right.
we also have two of the universities, um, uh, St. Joe's and Villanova. They both have service requirements. The so they come out once a year. We give them a project. The best use of Villanova so far has been in the Naval Asylum. As of 10 years ago, there was 50 unknown gravestones. The people were actually marked unknown. And with the Villanova students' help, um, they documented the positions when when the person to the left was buried, when the person to the right was buried. Um, and I think now we probably only have seven. And using that, um, information in conjunction with the fact that a lot of the gravestones were deteriorating their face and you couldn't read them. The VA replaced probably a good 1,000 of the 2,400
Wow.
stones. And that was a sight to see because they brought them in pallets of about 10 foot tall by 10 foot. And the Washington Crossing Cemetery director is responsible for the Mount Moriah National Cemetery, and they've been very good partners um, as far as making sure that the cemetery. There's a landscaper that just comes out to take care of those two areas, the Philadelphia side and the Yaden side National Cemetery. So they're very well kept.
Dave here, do you get enough reefs when you do reefs across America in December?
We do not. We do not. For about, again, I'm rounding off, for about 2,400, we get about half. What the picture that you saw there was 2019. That was the sole year that I've been involved, and I'm in my 10th year that we had enough. Actually, that year we actually fanned out a little bit into the cemetery and did requests, and put wreaths on other um, than the national cemeteries. But since then, we only do about half. So what we do is the first row, we start with grave one and we do every other one. And then the um, second row, we start with number two and do every other. So it alternates rows um, every year. But
I don't
no, we
know.
don't.
I don't know if you know, but you probably do. In January, after the December laying, I think you can get 5 for the price of 2. So we encourage our donators to do it early in January and get
Uh,
twice as many. So think about that.
yeah, thanks. I don't think we appreciated that. Yes, that's a very good. We've had some success. There's been some matching programs people have volunteered for. One of the organizations that's been extremely supportive, and I think it was that year they gave their is Subaru. Subaru headquarters is located nearby in New Jersey, and they have a very strong volunteer program. So they'll come out for cleanups. And I think it was 2019 where they donated the difference between what people donated and what was needed to have every grave have a wreath. So we have what's been very nice, not just about the volunteers, but some of the businesses that are associated with with our work. So uh, if you look at our Facebook page, you can see how enthusiastic we've been about the lawn maintenance company that maintains their mowers, and they're always looking out after us. And actually, this has been a tough year because that business was sold off, and we don't know what our relationship with the new owner is. But they were always keeping a lookout and saying, "Hey, there's a used mower. It's a great price, and we'll give you a discount on the tune-up." And um, one of our members is has a print shop, so I have business cards from him. So it's a very much of a roll up your sleeves, and we're appreciative of people appreciating the cemetery. We get a lot of support. We have a collaboration with the Sons of Union Civil War veterans. They're trying to catalog all the buried Union soldiers in the country. We started out with a list of, I'd say, 80, and now we're close to five. We've identified 500 in the cemetery so far. We have a collaboration with a nonprofit called the Stories Behind the Stars. They're trying to identify all World War II personnel that um, died during the war, whether they died killed in action, disease or accidents. And we've gone from, I think, 10 to 60 identified in the cemetery. Some of those stories um, are just incredible. The bios that have been created. We have one where um, the the soldier died in Italy, but his younger brother committed suicide that same week. And because they were Catholic, the Catholic cemetery wouldn't allow the brother who committed suicide to be buried in the Catholic cemetery. So um, they buried the suicide brother in Mount Moriah, but they put a stone scenograph in the cemetery so that way he wouldn't be alone.
Okay, Deb, did you want to make, I see you have a comment in there in the chat box. Did you want to make that?
Sure. I just kind of in the same vein as Al was saying about how friendly and outgoing everyone is, all of the volunteers at Mount Moriah. My cousin visited to find her grandparents' grave, my great uncle and aunt, at Mount Moriah. And she was directed to the gravesite by actually Jen, who is the current reigning queen of Mount Moriah. She's the president so far. But I mean, everybody there is awesome, and including Al.
Oh, that's very sweet. So I wasn't going to call out Deb because I didn't have her permission to, but Deb was the person that I was referring to a number of times. I'm in the cemetery trying to find something, and I'll stumble across a grave, and it's not documented where it is, and I'll call Deb in Arizona, and I'm like, "Here's a picture of a grave," or "This is the name of the person. Where am I standing?" And she'll say, "Well, you're standing in row two." And then I'll call her like 10 minutes later. I'm like, "Okay, I'm standing here." And she's like, "You're in row four. You skipped a row. Got to go backwards." And I'm very appreciative of the collaboration nature of my committee. We have we have a green committee, we have a grounds committee, and we have a historical committee. And so all three groups are trying to contribute to the upkeep of the cemetery.
To this week, Al, something you don't know, like whenever I get an edit on a Mount Moriah memorial, I go ahead and add them to the tree and then do the research on the larger family. I stumbled across an Irish family that the entire like generations of I have
Yeah.
450 edits waiting to be acknowledged just from this week. I was like, okay, I'm blind
Yeah,
now.
it's amazing sometimes for Deb and I that we'll get a single request and we'll research the family. I think I think there was that one family in the Yaden side that started out in the Yaden side, and we found 100 people in the family that was buried at Mount Moriah that the requester didn't know about.
Yep. Too fun.
Thank you, Deb. And I'll ask if you could turn off your microphone because we're getting some feedback. Yeah, great. Okay. Now, before I open it up back to the class for a few minutes, I do have a couple questions myself. You had mentioned that you did not locate the date of the fire for the gatehouse, and I assume that your researchers are, of course, really wonderful researchers. But I'd like, since new newspapers are added into all the different newspaper databases all the time, I'd like to challenge my class because they're all such good researchers to see if they can find an article on the date of the gatehouse fire, unless you have more updated information now.
No, I do not. We're relying on testimony. We've met somebody that lived in it in the 1950s, and we met someone that lived in the office apartment uh, in the 1970s and early 80s, but neither of them knew. Um, and we haven't been able to find any newspaper articles or any reference to it whatsoever. What we think happened was the fire occurred, and water got into the basement, and it became structurally unsound. The estimate for repairing it is about $2 million. The estimate of taking it apart brick by brick and putting it back together is about $2 million, which is $2 million more than we have.
Wow, that's a lot of money. Um, you had mentioned that you were doing various fundraising events, and I assume that there is land in the cemetery that has never been used. Have you ever thought about offering community gardens?
Um, Not to my knowledge. Excuse me, the focus of the Green Committee has been to identify significant trees. I think we are up to about 80 trees that have some sort. We have the third largest yew. We have the third largest yew in Pennsylvania. We have the second largest sycamore. There's trees that are there since the cemetery was founded. Um, so making it a destination spot. We do have a program for cradle graves. Um, that's been ongoing for I want to say about 3 years, um, where someone can sponsor and take care of that. There are two cemeteries in the area, Woodlands, which is um, in the city limits, but again on the edge, and Laurel Hill. They have they have very strong programs for supporting their cemeteries. They have a waiting list for doing tours, and to do it, the Laurel Hill requires that your tour be you invent your own tour. It has to be unique, and it has to be at least two. They have a very strong program. We're just not there yet. We don't have the volunteer strength for people to do either community gardens um, or tours at this time. They're just they've just come to capacity for the cradle graves.
Okay. And you had mentioned during your presentation about picnics, current picnics that are going on in the cemetery. Do the families have to book a space, like a Uinta Park? You have to book in advance a space for a picnic?
No, 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 no. These are spontaneous events, just by the families. We're happy when we stumble across them. Uh, they the cemetery currently, um, we we used to have um, the Philadelphia side opened all week and weekends, and the Yaden on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Mondays. But there's not enough volunteers to open and close the gates, so both are now the cemetery is now closed to car traffic, except for weekends and holidays. That doesn't prevent you from going into the cemetery because you can park on the edge and walk in, but there's there's no um, there's no preventing people from just coming in and walking. We can find the neighbors. They'll walk their animals. They'll walk strollers. There's really no barrier or requirement to consult with the nonprofit. And remember, we're caretakers. We're not owners. Um, we've we've made that very clear um, to everybody that um, so we do have a number. We've had about I want to say 10 people who have either been buried or reinterred or asked to have their members reinterred, and that's an ordeal. Because again, we don't own the cemetery. So um, if somebody wants to be interred, which is, I think we've had two, and I think we've had about 8 people uh, um, exhumed to be put into another cemetery since 2011, you actually have to hire a lawyer and go to Orphans Court and apply. And then the Orphans Court contacts us, and we make sure that we look at the records, see who else is buried there. Um, Records are very uh, disorganized in some areas. It's an ordeal. So um, no, we're there's no there's not much asking permission for individuals. Now we've had the Dark Some event. We've had um, a Hearst car show where people brought their vehicles in. We've had the ice cream social. We've had things, but those were organized by us and they're donation only.
That kind of brings me to some thoughts I've been having. You mentioned that you've had, especially when it comes to wreaths across America, that you've had some corporate donations. Have you ever thought, and then maybe you're already doing this. This is just a thought. I assume you've applied for grants.
Yes. So that's a um that's a highly competitive thing. And our vision is to have success, you must have success. Nobody's just going to give us money because we need it. And so when we go to corporate sponsors or we apply for a grant, we point out these events that are and activities that you can come to the cemetery, and it's an oasis from city life. You we there's fox, there's hawks. Um, you can see unique horticulture. Um, there's the history tours. So we use those things to say, you know, we're using, we're we're capable of attracting attention. What grants that we've had or what money we have has come from individuals. So I think the last big expenditure was the office building was close to a collapse, and they spent $30,000 to um, jack up the office and replace the foundation. The first floor is now renovated. There's an apartment that I think we're going to use the next round of fundraising to renovate. I think the overall goal would be to give someone a free apartment if they were willing to do educational tours or unlock the gates. So everything's progress, but there's a number of I've attended the board meetings. There's a lot of maintenance to be done on the Philadelphia side. There's a literal wall that's close to collapsing, and so that takes our priority over everything. But there's not unless it's veterans or something um, that a corporation can promote as they're doing their their that appeals to the public. General money for upkeep is not forthcoming, unfortunately.
Thank you. Oh, okay, I see Randall's got his hand up. Did you want to have a question, Randall?
Yes. Al, thank you for a wonderful presentation. My question is, I didn't hear you say, where did you move Betsy? Where is she interred after all the back and forth, please? That poor woman
So,
needs to stay in one place.
so yeah. So Betsy is now at the Betsy Ross house, um, and which she did not live in. So we think that's kind of apropos, but it's a very nice tourist attraction. It's 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 back where it's back at least on the street that she was living. Um, I we are very careful not to claim that Betsy is not there. The truth is, we don't really know. Um, the Betsy Ross house is adamant and very vocal against people saying that she's not there. Um, we just we're just unsure. But yeah, they three moves seems a little disrespectful,
It is
especially
disrespectful for
yeah.
considering her historical importance to the nation.
What I find very interesting about the story I find two things very interesting about Betsy Ross. When when you look at the story of Betsy Ross, there is absolutely positive, and this is another thing the Betsy Ross House doesn't like us saying. I want to say that I am not saying this as a representative of the Friends of Mount Moriah. I'm expressing my own opinion at this moment. But if you look at the history, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Betsy Ross created the flag for the American Revolution. None. If you look at the history of it, about around the centennial 1876, the country was in a very patriotic mood, and um, a bunch of her grandnephews and nieces got together, and one of them published an article that said, "Hey, our great aunt Betsy Ross created the American flag, and we know this because our parents told us." And they all signed a letter saying that's the story they hold, and it must be true. And lo and behold, a good proportion of those nieces and nephews started up a cottage industry about Betsy Ross. So they're all buried pretty close to her. And one of them, I don't want to put myself on the spot finding it. One of them was an illustrator. And so if you, Boggs, his father was the um, founder of the University of Pennsylvania Dental School, but he drew things for a living. So if you look back on, I'm sure everyone recognizes that famous picture of the fife, the drummer, um, um, and there's a person holding the American flag. Um, that's him. Um, he he drew for Harper's Ferry. He drew the illustrations that went along with um, the story about Santa Claus. He's the person who drew the picture of Santa Claus with the rosy cheeks.
I was going to mention that. Yeah, I thought yeah, because he's the one that Coca-Cola used for their PR.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so he's buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery in with his family. I just noticed he had a fire at his house in Chicago. They thought everything was lost. Um, and just a couple years ago, they uncovered some lithographs, original lithographs of his, but he capitalized on that whole story. And we have a copy of the electronic copy, obviously, of that letter that um, was um, was signed by everybody saying we know this to be true because our parents told us. If you have time, I have one more good story to tell you. Good story on my part.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in the 1870s, there was a African American woman whose sister passed away. The African American woman's first name is escaping me right at the moment. Her husband's name was Henry Jones, so I know her last name is Jones. So her sister dies, and she buries the sister in Mount Moriah. 6 months later, her husband dies. So the husband and wife were very prominent caterers in the city. They had money. So she put a notice in the newspaper. Her husband passed away. She sent a letter to Mount Moriah saying, on this day, we're going to bring him out to be buried. They come to the cemetery and they're met at the gate by one of the officers who tells her that African Americans are not allowed to be buried in the cemetery. And she's incredulous because she's like, my sister's been here 6 months. What do you mean? And they're like, sorry, all the other owners are saying that they're they're not gonna buy any more plots because they don't want to be buried with African Americans. So she sues. 3 years later, and so by the time it gets to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Mount Moriah has changed their tune. They never said it was because she was an African American. It's because there was no record of her owning the lot. And had they known that before, they would have refused her entrance before. And she, in the court briefing, she's like, that's a complete lie, because not only did they allow me to bury my sister, they kept trying to upsell me for railings and markers and all. They knew very well that I was in there. Um, what they were hanging their hat on was there was no documentation in the cemetery office that the deed had been transferred to her for that lot. So what had happened was a wealthy landowner had bought a lot of plots and then subsold it. But he didn't record it. So in the court filing, he says, I didn't record it because every time I give you a piece of paper, you guys lose it. So I just figured it's a private transaction. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that it was true that she didn't have a legal right to the plot because it wasn't, according to the bylaws, it wasn't recorded as her being the owner. But what they said was there was no provision in the bylaws of Mount Moriah that African Americans couldn't be buried there. And because there was no legal transfer, the ownership of the plot reverted back to the person who first purchased it. And he said, well, then if it's my decision, bury the guy. And by then, 3 years had passed, and there's really no evidence of him being buried at Mount Moriah. And we think there's a cemetery outside the city called Lincoln, if I believe that's where they're buried. The section that the sister's buried in is section 53. It has not been cleared yet. And it's on my list when anyone asks me whether or not, what section to do that. I want 53 because I want to look to see if she has a stone. That's my number one right at the moment.
Well, that sparked some discussion in the chat box. Let's see here. Bill from Texas says, I believe she was Margaret Jones. Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yes. Thank you for clearing that up. I was having I can't talk and think at the same time. So if I know it, it comes right on out.
And then Bill from Texas put down, Al, congratulations on your great work. Your group has accomplished. These are sometimes thankless efforts, but oh so important to the memory of those departed. They are not lost forever. The very best wishes to all your volunteers.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. They're incredible stories. So as I mentioned at the top of the talk, there are 2 Medal of Honor recipients in the cemetery that have been awarded it twice. And I think that's an incredible story. At least one of them, Lowry, he was awarded it, and then they wouldn't let him do anything dangerous or anything he wanted to do. So at the end of his enlistment, he didn't re-enlist um, under his own name. He went by a second name and re-enlisted, and then did something heroic the second time. And I kind of have this vision of them giving him the Medal of Honor the second time, and like, haven't you been here before? Kind of that's incredible. That's incredible to have two people that have been awarded it twice. We have a set of brothers, the Galloway brothers. Um, and one of my life's goals is we have a picture of one of the Galloway brothers, but we don't have a picture of the other one. That's one of our goals we're always on the lookout for.
I have one more thing I wanted to add. On that slide where you showed the Bassett ice cream truck, I just wanted to kind of elaborate on the Bassett family. If any of the people who are logged in today have Bassetts in their family, there is a Bassett Family Association website, and I do believe that that Bassett ice cream founder is actually on there. So I just wanted to add that.
Yes, I encourage everyone to go to the Friends of Mount Moriah website. There's a ton of information. If you're so inclined, you can donate. But more than that, take a look at our notable burial section. Uh, we have a former journalist writing up the bios, and they're great reads. They have pictures of the people, pictures of the graves, if any of them are available. They're very representative of Philadelphia history, of national history. They're just good resources. As I was telling Suzanne, I really want to encourage everybody to move past facts and dates. It's very interesting to find someone famous, but our contention is that everybody has a unique story and it can be interesting. So we have everyday people who suffered crisis. I was telling Suzanne there was one gravestone where there's 10 people, and a couple and their 8 children, and 7 out of the 8 children died between 21 and 23, all in the space of like 3 years. They just all had tuberculosis, and they all caught it from each other. And how devastating would it be to lose 7 of your children, adult children, in a 3 to 4 year time period? I can't even imagine. And that's not someone telling us. We just figured it out and looked at their birth certificates.
Okay, I'll give the class one last chance to ask any questions they have. Okay, Al, it looks like all the questions have been answered, but I will like to invite you to stay for just a few moments after we stop the recording. Is that all? Is that okay with you?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Okay, then I'm gonna just let the class know if you're new today for the first time, our class does continue on for several more hours into what we call the open lab portion, where we all work together on our family trees. And if you're new today for the first time, I'd like to invite all of you to stay. And of course, we'll go ahead and stop the recording. But before I stop the recording, I want to let everyone know that if you are going to leave us right now, please download the chat box before you go, because if you forget and you log back in, the chat box will be empty. So with that, Al, I'll say thank you very much, and please stick around for just a few more minutes. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.